All right, everybody. We are coming to you here from an undisclosed location, which is down the street from our house. So it's not super undisclosed, vaguely, just partially disclosed. Thanks everybody for being here with us. As always, thank you to our Patreon subscribers, who I believe still include Yiffy and also Chris Lee and Karen Lee Duffel. So thanks to them. And as always, when you hop on, say hi in the comments. If you have a question, ask a question. And so my executive producer is manning the comments. So exciting.
You want to mention what we're going to talk about?
Oh yeah. We were going to talk tonight about Andrew Jackson, because I've just been thinking about Andrew Jackson lately for reasons. So, do we have any comments or anything exciting? Anything happening?
No, nothing is happening yet. You have to give it a chance. People are just logging on. We haven't been on in a few weeks because of birthdays and Halloweens. And then last week we missed it because Diwali, and we decided to watch fireworks with the neighbors instead.
Yeah, it was a lot of stuff going on.
Karen says you're welcome. Hello, Karen.
Karen. I'm glad that Karen can join us, because typically Karen is working. Cindy, also, what's up? How you doing?
Yep, he's on now.
So I felt like I wanted to talk about Andrew Jackson just because I feel like Jackson is kind of underappreciated in terms of his significance. And I feel like, I grew up in Jacksonville and didn't know a lot about him. And in the 19th century, it was literally the age of Jackson, right? He's important, but also kind of just sort of relegated to, he's old-timey president. People don't know a lot about him. And in retrospect, Jackson has not come out well in recent years. The Democrats used to have an annual fundraiser called the Jefferson Jackson Dinner, and that abruptly stopped about 5 years ago, because it turns out Jefferson owned slaves, and Jackson owned slaves, and also Native American, and they kind of ended that in a real big hurry, which is significant because Jackson really led to the creation of the Democratic Party as it existed for most of the 19th century up until FDR. So I feel like we should talk about Jackson, right? And I don't like Jackson very much, but he's super important, right? He's super important president. Let's do it. Jackson was born in South Carolina before the American Revolution War. He was a little boy when the Revolutionary War happened, and he had this really crappy upbringing where one of his parents died and they got remarried, and then the other parent died and they got remarried, and then his step parents died, and he ended up with an uncle who died, and he had this he shuffled around with a bunch of family members a lot. And the one story about him that sticks out from his youth is it was in the Revolutionary Wars, like 1777 or 8. And the British Army comes to the town that he's living in, and this British officer, rides up, and Jackson goes to grab his horse so that he can get off the horse. And the officer somewhat rudely tells Jackson to shine his shoes, and Jackson's like, I don't have to do that. And the officer hit him in the face with a saber, using the flat of the blade, not the cutting edge, but the side of it, and whacked him in the face. And Jackson hated the British for the rest of his life and had a big scar on the side of his face for the rest of his life. And Jackson, I would think that to understand Jackson, you also have to understand that he was a guy motivated almost completely by his resentments. He was a hater. He was a professional, full-time, weapons grade hater, and that's just what he did. And so he just nursed his resentments like Nixon and kind of polished them into a fine gem, and looked at them at night. And so Jackson comes of age in the early 1800s, 19th century, and we can mention Jackson's first sort of foray into the national stage is that during the American War of 1812, he leads an army of militia volunteers down to Louisiana, and they fight the British, who have invaded Louisiana to attempt to capture New Orleans. And the War of 1812 is not going well. We got our ass kicked in Detroit. The British burn Washington, D.C. Remember, Dolly Madison takes all the paintings in her dress and the unfinished painting of Washington and rolls it up and hides it. The British stabled horses in the Capitol. The unfinished portrait of Washington is for real, and I'm not making it up. It's for real, 8 by 11. It's not Like it's not a huge, but you think it's huge because you've never seen it, but it's in a outside the Oval Office. There's a bench, and when you have a meeting with the president, you wait on the bench, and up over the bench is the painting, and it's literally 8 by 11. It's like you could hold it in one hand, and that's the half finished. With the bottom is not done. That's Washington. There's a really crappy movie. Chris Miller always asks about bad historical movies. Well, we will have to do that one time. But Clint Eastwood made one about J. Edgar Hoover, and there's a great series of scenes that show Hoover coming in as a young director of the FBI in the 30s, sitting and waiting to talk to FDR under that portrait, and then it shows him every few scenes sitting in the same bench under the same portrait, older, as he goes and visits, FDR and Truman and Eisenhower and Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon. Right, and that was accurate, although the rest of that movie was super garbagey and lame. But like whatever. And so it made Hoover look better than he should, which is to say, slightly less awful than Hitler, which is But anyway, and it also whitewashed a bunch of stuff because the gimmick of the movie is it's a bunch of people are taking Hoover's memoirs and he's narrating them. And that's never happened because he would have never revealed all that crap. But one of the guys ends up being a black FBI agent during the Nixon administration. And you hate to say it to Clint Eastwood, who made the movie, but there were no black FBI agents until like the late 80s. So he can, it's not accurate, even if you wanted it to be or whatever. But anyway, Dolly Madison has to flee the Capitol and like takes all the art from the White House, so it doesn't end up in the British Museum, right? And the British stabled horses in the old House chamber in the Capitol, which is today Statuary Hall, where every state can put statues of its two favorite people. By the way, fun fact: if you go to Statuary Hall, it's cool. It's the old House chamber. John Quincy Adams, we're going to talk about him. He died there, and I think there's a marker on the floor. And most of the states actually haven't even put statues. There's a bunch of states that don't have any statues in Statuary Hall. And I guess if you're from South Dakota, you would have to reach to find two famous people from South Dakota. It would be. I mean, that's true. You could throw Sitting Bull out there, and it would be like, what's up? But I don't know where he was even from. He'd have to go from but like some of the states just don't care, and other states have like a bunch of the former Confederate states have completely irrelevant Confederates who were like a major in the Confederate Army. It's like, first of all, this guy's not famous, and second, he's a Confederate. What's your problem? And like you think you would be like some states are like, well, we have a couple presidents from our state, so let's hit it. Right? It would be cool if you could, because like New York, has a couple Roosevelts they might want, and like Texas has a long roster of people who might want to be. But even, I mean, some say you could do Kentucky, you could do Jim Bowie, or David Crockett, right? Those are okay people to have. But yeah, you could pick some Native American dudes. We could have it was Osceola. We could have Osceola in Florida if we wanted. I mean, but like it just most states don't care. And then like when statuary was a big thing in the 19th century, all the Confederate states were like, I guess we'll put some guys up that we like. And now those people are like, you don't want to. And it's offensive to have a statue of a Confederate in the national capital for obvious reasons. But anyway, that's the place where the British stabled horses when they captured Washington in like 1814 or whatever. And so the story of the Battle of New Orleans is that Jackson attacked New Orleans, and he knew that his army couldn't compete against the Redcoats on the offensive. So what he did is this really like offensive defensive strategy, where if you know your military history, this is Belisarius, 6th century AD, Western Roman Empire reconquest by Justinian. This is where this comes into play a lot. Like you do. Look, it's Belisarius, his most important Roman general after like Caesar.
Which one?
Julius, of course, the best one. Not a good general. Like a good ruler, but not a good general. I would have also accepted. I mean, what's about Nero? He gets a bad rap. The fire wasn't his fault, and he paid to reconstruct it. And it wasn't until the 4th century that they blamed him for the fire because he didn't have anything to do with it. It was building codes. The bad building codes contributed to the fire. Nero was a straight up dude. Caligula, look, I mean, not every family's got one crazy or a couple of crazy people in it. All right, I'm just saying, Nero he's not Commodus, who was pretty worse. Okay, I'm just throwing it out there. But anyway, what Belisarius had done when he invaded North Africa in the 500s was that he advanced his army into a position that threatened the something important like a capital city or something, and then he fortified his position. And the idea was that if you ignored him, he would just raid the surrounding areas and cause you problems. But if you attacked him, he would be on the defensive. Right, and that's what Jackson did. He snuck his army quick close to the city of New Orleans, and if the British ignored him, they would liberate the city. If they attacked him, he would be on the defensive. And when the British attacked Jackson, he actually had Kentucky long riflemen with him who had rifles, very, very primitive but very accurate marksman rifles. And supposedly the story is that when the British general ordered the attack, his men start going forward, and one of the Kentucky long riflemen killed the British general in the first attack, shot him in the head and killed him. And so the British ended up attacking 3 times and getting killed each and retreating each time. And finally, they retreated. And so Jackson had liberated New Orleans. And it was the one bright spot in the War of 1812 where pretty much otherwise we had gotten beat like a drum. Right? And it ended up ending in 1815 for 2 reasons. First, the British signed the Treaty of Ghent with us. And second, the Napoleonic Wars, which the War of 1812 was kind of like a sub part of, ended with Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo in Belgium in 1815. Right? Shout out to my man Napoleon Bonaparte. Everything would have gone fine if he just took every place over. He should have just, yeah. And honestly, he might have even, he almost would have won if he had been a little smarter about it. And frankly, it's all the Russians' fault anyway. They're terrible.
I didn't want Russia.
Yeah, well, he had to invade Russia because Alexander jumped out of the continental system and undermined Napoleon's attempt to defeat the British economically. So you just had to, you couldn't allow that to happen. But Tammy Dara's trying to get your attention. She wants.
To do it quietly
It's cool. He can't see you. Yeah, he can't see you when he's bent over the head in the fridge. So anyway, Jackson liberated New Orleans, and it was the one bright spot, right? And that's, of course, understandably, if you're Jackson and you're angling for higher office, this is not a terrible thing. We should mention, by the way, that this is where Jackson decides to get into politics, and he ended up. We'll mention also in the late 18-teens, early 1820s, he actually invaded Florida, and Florida was a Spanish possession, and he invaded West Florida, which is the Panhandle today, and the Monroe administration was divided over whether this was a good idea. But Jackson, in very typical Jacksonian flair, pretty much was like, whatever, sue me. I'm gonna do what I want, whatever. And he invaded Florida and defeated the Spanish. And the Spanish decided they couldn't defend Florida. You can't. Florida had a huge land boundary with Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, all the way to Louisiana. You can't defend it, right? So what do? They sold it to the United States. And as a result of Jackson's invasion, the United States of America acquired East Florida and West Florida. East Florida is like east of Tallahassee, all the rest of Florida. West Florida is the West Panhandle, and I think it's like Alabama, Mississippi. It's little tidbits of them that hang down. And so subsequently, Jackson went to war and defeated the Seminole tribes as well, fought a number of battles against Seminole Indians in central and southern Florida. Trying to give you petting, but you don't want it. So let me get the spray. He really didn't freak out very much. He was just like, "What's up?" He's scratching, and they sprayed him last night. It's cool, whatever. Dog stuff. It's being a dog. Guest dog. I don't know if can they see him? Is he tall enough? There we go. What's up, puppy butt? Yeah. You don't even care. I'm trying to give you attention. Whatever. And so I don't have treats. So this established Jackson as being like a tough military guy, like a leader of men. His soldiers called him Old Hickory because he's tough. And he served for a minute as a governor of Florida, which is where Jacksonville, of course, gets its name, right? And so, having said that, Jackson gets involved in Tennessee politics. Right, he moves out to Tennessee, and in 1824 he runs for president. Right, and he feels like, hey, this is my chance. You got to understand, in the 1820s. Since the beginning of the Republic, there had been 2 political parties, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And the thing about political parties, everybody hates them now, but they kind of provided a certain degree of like organization for politics. I mean, sometimes you just don't have the energy to like find out everything about every politician. And so it's easy to have a shorthand of like, well, I kind of like the Federalists and this guy's a Federalist, so I'm just going to vote for him, like whatever. And it also, as you can imagine, provided politicians a certain level of institutional support. I'm not just some guy running. who has to explain my stance on every issue. I can say, well, look, I'm a Federalist, right? Don't you guys, I believe in what the Federalists believe, right? And so it sort of provided a way. It's sort of like taking a bunch of iron shavings scattered around a table, and if you put a magnet over them, it'll pull them into a pattern. It'll sort of provide some kind of level of organization to sort of relatively chaotic process, right? And it's a whole other lecture, but the Federalist Anti-Federalist existed because of, in part, the Constitution, the legacy of the Revolutionary War, and a fundamental argument about what was the relationship of the federal government to the states, right? But Jackson, well, we should say, in the War of 1812, the Federalists basically just vanished. I mean, they did the worst thing you could do in American politics, which is win. Because when you win, there's no more reason for your political party to exist, right? I mean, that's if the pro-life people successfully got abortion banned nationwide, then there would be no reason for them to exist, right? I mean, like you would expect that like Susan B. Anthony List would shut down their operation the next day because it's like, what's the point of giving you money? What's the point of you existing, right? And well, they as Dara points out, they wouldn't want to do that because they'd still want to make money. And the head of the Susan B. Komen list, or Susan B. Anthony list, right? Head of Susan B. Anthony list makes like a couple $100,000 a year. She's not going to want to just wind that shit down and go take a break. She's going to want to keep collecting paychecks, right? And that was the problem. The Federalists faced the idea of like, look, you guys got what you wanted. We have a powerful national government. It's clearly superior to the states. And the Federalists had to kind of justify their existence, right? And there was a whole scheme they embarked on in the War of 1812 to secede from the Union if they didn't get stuff they wanted, and it was really stupid and it blew up in their face. So the Federalists basically go away, right? And you end up with just the anti-Federalists, which were called the Jeffersonian Republicans, and were later called the Democratic Republicans, and will be called the Jacksonian Democrats, and we'll just call them the Democrats now. Right. Well, remember, the modern day Democrats are not the same as the Democrats we're talking about because 180 years separates them from now, and things changed, notably the New Deal, which caused the political parties to switch places. But that's a whole other thing that we don't have time to talk about. And so just FYI, when someone says my second least favorite thing in history of, well, the Democrats are the party of slavery, and it's like, it's incredibly inaccurate in terms of it crushes a whole bunch of information into a single sentence that's not really fair, right? It's not remotely accurate. So anyway, Jackson ends up sort of involved in the Democratic Party politics, and he runs for president in 1824, right? And it's normally called the era of good feelings in American history. It's good feelings. We don't have parties, so we're all friends, and we go grab hands and it's kumbaya, and they're swaying. But actually, one good historian has called it, Sean Willens called it, the era of bad feelings. Because when you didn't have parties, politics wasn't really organized. Nobody really knew who their friends were. Nothing really kind of made any sense, Is there a question?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. I can't control that. And so, having said that, along comes the election of 1824, and you get a four candidates running, a dipstick who I don't want to talk about, Henry Clay, John Quincy Adams, and Andrew Jackson, right? And so Jackson's clearly running as a sort of Democratic candidate. He is, and so I'm just getting messages over here.
Yeah, I was about to say, don't message that group right now.
It's fine. I'm not going to click it on my. I wonder if I is a link I can click on my phone, but I don't know what.
You're distracted. I don't know if you're equally offended by Republicans claiming to be the party of Lincoln.
Yeah, I mean it. In a way, yeah, because I'm less offended by that, I suppose, just because like that's not like it's a positive thing to say like Lincoln is a Republican, and so it's like we're Republicans too, and it's not super accurate because Lincoln probably wouldn't like the Republican Party today, but at least it's not a lie, and it's not so blatant a lie. But it's worse when you use it as a way to attack another. But when you turn it into an insult, right? And you're like, well, all the Southerners who were owned slaves were Democrats, and it's like, yeah, but they were also all conservatives, so. Is it important that they were conservative Democrats? Which part's more important? Because today they would be conservative Republicans, right? Yes. Well, but politically, though, a conservative Democrat today might still be a conservative, but he might not be a Democrat. And we know that he wouldn't because Democrats in the 1960s, after the Democratic Party supported civil rights under Johnson, they switched parties. Right? Not all of them did. Some of them stayed Democrats until the 1990s and stuff, but a lot of them did. And crucially today, white Southern conservative voters, the mainstay of the pre-1960s Democratic Party, they still exist, and they don't vote Democrat anymore. They vote Republican. It's sort of like that fact, just that sentence ignores all of those realities of the mid to late 20th century American politics, which is why it pisses me off. And so the short answer is, Evan is correct to point that out. It is inaccurate, but it bothers me less because it's not like a politically motivated like attack, right? It's not like an insult to the party, right? You're not saying bad things about the Democrats. You say, well, Lincoln was a Republican, and it's like he was sort of the first Republican president, like. John C. Fremont ran in 1856, but nobody liked that guy. John C. Fremont is married to Jessie Hart Benton, who's Thomas Hart Benton's daughter. He explored, he explored California and totally kicked ass, but was also a real dipshit governor of Missouri during the Civil War. So, yeah. I always confuse him with John Wesley Powell, who's the one-armed guy that explored the Grand Canyon. But John C. Fremont was the two-armed guy who led the Bear Flag Revolt in California, which is why California became independent, which is why, of course, it got annexed in the Mexican War. Yeah, and he married Thomas Hart Benton. Thomas Hart Benton, by the way, senator from Missouri, hated Andrew Jackson. They hated each other. So to circle back around to Andrew Jackson. So yeah. And so what can we say about 1824? Well, there were two sort of proto parties that were kind of emerging, and just like the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists in 1824, the parties were kind of divided about their attitude to the government. Should the government? Some guys thought the government should intervene decisively in the economy, right? Like the government, like economic development, which is vital to the Western states, is not going to happen unless the government makes it happen. The Erie Canal had just was being built, right? It would open, I think, in the 1830s, right? Erie Canal, a very significant development in the history of the Upper Midwest, allowed goods from the Upper Midwest to be transported directly to upstate New York and move south into New York City and shipped to the Atlantic. Brainchild, among others, of Governor DeWitt Clinton in New York City. And people said the Erie Canal got superseded by railroads, but actually during the Civil War, when the Mississippi River was closed, it really altered the prices. And it turned out that people realized that the Erie Canal existing meant that railroads in the Northeast had to charge competitive freight rates to get stuff east. And when the Civil War closed the Mississippi River and affected the Erie Canal, it was also partially closed in the Civil War, the freight rates on the railroads skyrocketed. And everybody was like, even though the Erie Canal doesn't get used a lot, the fact that it exists is actually kind of important. And so the fact that like it's a thing that exists, it sort of matters. There's really weird stuff going on. Dare's getting over there to go regulate. Boom. Here comes the boom. What? Yeah. And so, yeah. Yeah, it was this afternoon. The reason I just walked away is because Sarah's like, on my scooter. I'm just going to go get it. And I'm like, you can't just walk down the street. And she was like, why not? It's fine. And I thought about it. I'm like, she probably would be fine if a car didn't come. But it turns out she was looking around the garage for the scooter, which was the garage, was the front porch. And so I had to be like, it's on the front porch. She was like, oh. And I don't know if she ever would have found it if I hadn't told her that. Yeah. And then we would have really been freaked out, like, where did she go? So, all right, anyway, kid distraction. So having said that, no, is she thinking of, I don't think Thomas Hart Benton was, he's a Missouri politician. Yeah, let's look up Thomas Hart Benton. Thomas Hart Benton. Yeah, no. No, she's right. There was a 20th century muralist and painter, Thomas Hart Benton, who painted all kinds of landscape. Oh yeah, no, people of Chilmark. Yeah, these are some really famous landscapes and stuff. He did. Yes, and so no. And some of these are in the Smithsonian. No, she's correct. There is a Thomas Hart Benton who is a painter that is not this guy who is a 19th century Missouri politician, senator, and longtime political figure who is named the same. So weird coincidence. And I actually know Thomas Hart Benton, the painter's work. I just didn't know him by name because I've got books that have his pictures on the cover, as it turns out. I had a history of the American economy, I think, that had a picture of one of his murals on the cover. So cool. If you're interested in Thomas Hart Benton, the politician, at a history conference a few years ago, I bought an as of yet unpublished biography of Thomas Hart Benton from the University of Missouri Press, who then mailed me a copy like 6 months later when it came out, and they still mail me stuff all the time. And I'm like, look, I don't really care about the history of your state other than this one guy. And so I was happy to buy that one book, and I bought it, and so leave me alone. But they were really great. They let me flip through the galleys of the book, and I decided it was cool, so I gave them money on the spot. You don't always get a chance to buy a biography of Tom Sarpin. And so is that Teresa? Okay, well, cheers, Stephen, because he's not wrong. He's not wrong. It's just there's two guys with the exact same name who are both famous. So anyway, the attitude of a lot of people in the Congress and in politics and stuff was that the government should intervene more in the economy. Right? I mean, economic development in the West is never just going to happen. The government needs to intervene to build canals, roads, railroads is coming. It's not yet. It's 1820s, so it's like 10 years off. But a lot of other people were like, yeah, but the consequences of that are that you're going to have to pick, like we can't build a road everywhere. We have to build a road in one state, and like which state goes first? We can't make it happen. It's not fair, and that's bias. But also, who's going to pay for this? We're going to raise taxes, issue bonds, go into debt. And a lot of people were deeply suspicious of the financial and banking system. It was heavily partisan because of the bank pushed through by then Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton, famous bank bill. We had the deal at Thomas Jefferson's house to get the votes for the bank bill in return for allowing the capital to be placed in between Maryland and Virginia. And so a lot of people were hugely skeptical of the idea, banks just, they move a bunch of money around. It's like this, and all of a sudden you end up in debt. The Southerners were hugely suspicious. Every Southerner had a mortgage up to his eyeballs for his property, all the slaves that he'd bought and all this. And so they had this incredible suspicion of allowing the financialization of the economy is what we would call it today, right? They really didn't like the idea that you were going to create a bunch of banks and a bunch of Eastern bankers are going to shuffle them around and send you bills. Nobody liked that. Right. And so this sort of became the pivot point of the economy. A lot of Westerners look like we're never going to be anything other than slaves of the Eastern, elite unless we can get development in our states. But of course, the counter is, well, yeah, but who's going to pay for it? The paying of it will turn you into, you'll be forging in the chains. Right. I mean, that's the argument. And so the three guys that we need to care about that run for president in 1924 are a Kentucky Senator, Henry Clay, in Massachusetts, a politician, John Quincy Adams, former Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, and then Jackson himself, right? And what ends up happening, to make a long story dreadfully short, is that Jackson doesn't get a majority of the electoral vote. He gets a plurality, but not a majority. And under the 12th Amendment, it goes to the House. And Clay withdraws from the election in order to throw votes to Adams, because Adams will then have enough to beat Jackson. And that happens. Jackson calls foul. He calls this a corrupt bargain, a term that will haunt Clay for the rest of his political career, right? A term that will be thrown at Clay for the next 40, 30 years, right? And so what ends up happening is Adams wins, and Jackson calls it. He says, Adams is going to give Clay a job. That's the payment that Adams will get from that's the payment Clay will get from Adams, right? And lo and behold, Adams becomes president. South Carolina politician John C. Calhoun becomes, who we'll talk about in a minute, becomes vice president. And he's getting real, but becomes vice president. And Clay becomes the most powerful man in the government other than the president in the 19th century, the Secretary of State. And if you're Jackson, you're like, oh, called it. And he, corrupt bargain becomes the term, right? And so did Adams and Clay engage in corruption? I mean, not really. Jackson is mostly pissed he didn't think of the deal first, right? And to be totally fair, Clay and Adams basically agreed on a lot of things. So you could understand Clay being like, look, I'm not going to win, but if I throw my support behind you, you win, and I'd rather have you than him, right? I mean, better you than a guy I disagree with, right? And so the fourth guy, no one gives a crap about him. He's stupid, right? And so Adams becomes president. And he's a one-term president, and he's my favorite one-term president. He's one of my favorite presidents. He's a great guy. What can you say about Adams? His father was John Adams, this first vice president, second president, a guy who was responsible for, among other things, helping to shepherd the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution through the debates. A guy who got no. What's wrong with Adams?
Not exactly for women's votes.
Well, nobody was for women's votes except women, and of course we don't listen to them because it's 1780, right? I mean, come on.
Abigail even tried to.
The story is Abigail Adams wrote John Adams. It was like, remember, the votes of women in the Constitution when you make it, and Adams was like, lol, and just basically dismissed her, and it was like, kind of fuck you. To be totally fair to Adams had been there from the beginning of American politics. He was in math. Nobody liked him. He was a short, asinine, like nasty, acerbic guy. Very smart. The Wizard of Braintree. Had, by the way, defended the accused British soldiers at the Boston Massacre. So legal ethics, though, he said they paid me and I had to do my best. Didn't talk about it later. And Adams was, I think Adams said, I'm gonna get it wrong, but he said when the history of the Revolution is written, it will be said that Alexander Hamilton smote the head of George Washington and outjumped. No, it was Benjamin Franklin smote the head of George Washington and outjumped Thomas Jefferson holding the Declaration. Right, and the point, of course, is reference to the birth of Athena. But the point Adams was making is nobody's going to remember little old me who was there, did everything, right? And by the way, fun story: who got Jefferson appointed to the committee to draft the Declaration of Independence? John Adams. John Adams recommended. He's like, well, my friend Thomas Jefferson over here, I just met him. He seems like he really knows how to write. Why don't we put him on the committee and we'll draft the outline of the Declaration, but Thomas over here can make it into something that a person would read. And that's why Thomas Jefferson got the job of writing the actual text of the Declaration of Independence, because John Adams made it happen, right? And so Adams, he brought his son up during the war, John Quincy, and he's named for Adams' friend Josiah Quincy. And he went to Josiah Quincy, or John Quincy Adams, and Adams went to Europe. They went all over Europe. They negotiated for loans in France and also in the Netherlands and Britain. They represented America in front of the British government, which was not inconsiderably dangerous at a time when America was literally at war. They sailed across the Atlantic in the winter into a sea full of British ships, right? And so young John Quincy Adams saw this stuff happen. He saw the battles of Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill with his mother, and so he kind of was. He grew up to sort of believe in the idea of public service as a good in and of itself, right? And so what happened? Well, Adams, he never got his presidency together. It never turned into a functioning thing. It's sort of like if you ever see somebody take a couple steps and stumble, and they just keep stumbling for a while, and they keep going forward, but they don't ever quite, Tim is like, oh, you're talking about me. And they don't ever quite recover their feet. They don't get to they just kind of trip for a while, and eventually they just fall flat. And it takes a long time, but they cover some distance. That's kind of John Quincy Adams' presidency. It just never turned into a functioning thing. I mean, look, if you're running, you're technically just falling, and you stop yourself every time a foot comes in front. So it's fine. Yeah. Yeah, and so it's a tragedy because John Quincy Adams was fundamentally a decent guy. He just couldn't make it happen. And part of the problem, I think we have two problems. John Quincy Adams was a smart dude, but unfortunately, when you're a smart dude, nobody really wants to hear you tell other people how smart you are because it kind of makes you sound like a jackass. And that was John Quincy Adams' favorite thing to do. It was well, if you'd read as much Greek as I had in ancient Greek, if you knew Aristotle the way I knew Aristotle because I read him in Greek, you don't, you're a loser. You'd probably agree with me. And after a minute of that, you're like, this fucking guy, right? And so the other problem with John Quincy Adams is that he had this vision of the country. The government should draw the states into the union. It should really cement the bonds of union between the states. It should make the government needed to make the union function better. And he kept coming up with these ideas. A national university where the smartest people from every state can come to the capital and learn all about the government, work in the government. And the Southerners are like, pay tax dollars to send our kids up there to learn how the government's going to tax us more? Fuck you. And then my favorite thing is that Adams had this idea. He was like, guys, what was the thing that broke mankind's subservience to ignorance? It was astronomy, right? It was the great astronomers of the scientific revolution who were able to look at the sky, Galileo and Copernicus, who proved that the Earth moved around the sun and there were sunspots and moons on Jupiter and whatever. And so he wanted to build an observatory, right? And he thought this will prove to the Europeans that we're not a bunch of dumb morons. We have our own observatory. And crucially, it actually would be scientifically useful because the observatory would be located around the curve of the Earth from Greenwich in England, you could actually share data with the British, and it would be meaningful to do that. They would want observations of the sky from another part of the hemisphere, another hemisphere of the sky, right? And so Adams proposed building an observatory in Kentucky, up in the mountains, away from everything, and he called it, memorably, observatories lighthouses of the sky. Just like the lighthouses of the sea show you where to go on the dark nights when you're traveling the ocean, the lighthouses of the sky show you where to go when you're looking through the heavens trying to orient yourself in the universe. And it was a beautiful poetic piece of imagery. It was a really good scientific argument. And the Congress basically took a shit all over it. They were like, pay for a lighthouse in the sky? What kind of dipshit stuff is this? Look in the sky, pay tax dollars to get measurements of the surface of the moon? What kind of dumb crap is that? And Adams was like, basic scientific research is the foundation of all human. And they're like, we're not paying for it. And so Adams ran into what he saw as the provincialness of the Congress, right? Are there any questions?
No, I'm just laughing at you.
I mean, this is serious stuff, right? Should the government? Yeah, should the government fund basic scientific research? Well, it has a benefit to all mankind, right? But on the other hand, like, you know, it's going to be, you're not going to get anything from it other than we know more stuff. You're going to increase Tang, sure, and and pens that work in space, and Velcro. No, actually, you don't like. But you know what? The Russians actually. There's a whole thing on the internet. NASA spent hundreds of dollars developing a pen that works in space because regular ballpoint pens, the ink flows up and down. So you got to have a special one. The Russians just use a pencil because they're smart and we're stupid. No, because if you take a pencil in space, you have to sharpen it, which means you have to bring a pencil sharpener, and also the lead breaks, and there's lead floating around the cabin of the spacecraft, and that's clogging the air filters, and we're all dying because Vasily dropped the pencil on the floor and broke the lead again. So that's stupid. And so it's a whole extra other thing. It's complicated stuff. Instead, you just bring a pen and you click it and you write it and you click it and you put it away. I mean, actually, crayons and markers would work relatively well. Yeah. But anyway, that there's a whole thing. There's a whole meme on the internet that NASA built like a pencil for a pen for like $100 a pen, and the Russians just use a pencil. And it's like, yes, but the pencil's objectively worse than the pen, and there's a bunch of reasons why. And so I like that's always annoying. Also because I just don't like the 20th century Russians, and I'd like to take time to crap on them if I can.
Evan likes to point out that we still, 250 years later, have flat earthers in science.
Well, yeah, I mean, and weirdly, you know, Evan mentions flat earthers and science deniers. Yeah, but let me mention the flat Earth conspiracy theory is big in the 19th century, all the way down YouTube. Now it's back, and something like 95% of flat earthers, if you talk to them, argue that they got into flat Earth stuff because of YouTube. It's YouTube. YouTube did it. Yeah.
Thanks, YouTube.
Thanks, YouTube.
We're on it.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and so, and there you go. And I don't know what I mean.
Watch us on YouTube instead of things about flat Earth.
Yeah, no, we won't have any flat earthers here, because that's the worst. Actually, I know a guy. One of my friends is a physics teacher, and he actually had a flat earther in his physics class. And everybody was like, "Oh, did you light them up?" And he was like, "No, because that's like a terrible thing to do, to put somebody on the spot, like make fun of them in class. And also, like, it's a terrible thing for me as the teacher to spend time yelling at a student that they're dumb, because like the power dynamic is kind of bad." And he's like, "I would like to gently try to steer them towards rethinking their ideas. But like, unfortunately, I talked to that person and it was like they were like a fundamentalist about it." How do you explain the pictures of the Earth from the moon? How do you explain the, like, you can do actual experiments. There's a great YouTube video, ironically, that shows two guys doing an experiment where they shine a light onto a mirror. And if the Earth is flat, you just put them, they measure the stands, right? The stands are exactly the same height. And we set up one, and a couple miles away set the other. And you turn the light, boom, doesn't work. And in the video, the guy's like, hold on. And he picks up the mirror and he holds it up and it lights up. And the reason he has to hold the mirror higher than the light is because the Earth is curved, so the light is at an angle, right? Very slight. And you can watch the guy on the video realize that he just gained empirical scientific evidence that proves the Earth is not flat. And he's like really upset. But like, sorry, bitch. The ancient Greeks, man. Who was it? No, it was the geometer. No, it begins with an A. I'll think of it in a while. But he used obelisks in Egypt to prove the shadow. The shadow was at an angle. Yeah, I can't think of them off the top of my head. There's a great YouTube video of Carl Sagan using a piece of paper and a flashlight to make the same proof. Aristogoras or something like that. It was more tongue twistery than that. And so anyway, back to John Quincy Adams. So John Quincy Adams' presidency just kind of fails to come together. It's sort of a lot like, but I hate to say this, it's a lot like the Terminator franchise, where it started out great, and then after a while, it just sort of fallen. Eratosthenes. Eratosthenes, I guess, would be the Greek. Yeah, but he proved that by the way, Eratosthenes measured the surface of the Earth diameter. He measured the diameter of the Earth to within, I think, 100 kilometers using arithmetic. It's like 3rd century BC. Give it to us. I mean, whatever's okay. Mm-hmm. But anyway, John Quincy Adams is president. Usually fails to come together.
Circa 195, 194 BC.
So 2nd century BC. So 3rd century BC when he wrote his books. Yeah, he's a baller. That guy. Come for the Andrew Jackson, stay for the Bronze Age Greek mathematics.
We cover a little bit of everything.
I mean, it's how it goes. So anyway, what can we say? Well, Jackson spent the period of time between 1824 and 1828 basically being pissed. He went back to his house. He sort of brooded about how he was going to get his revenge or whatever, and he legitimately was worried about the direction of the republic. He thought the bank system that Adams okayed the second national U.S. bank, which was revived under Monroe and then implemented under Adams. And so Jackson thought, look, they're literally selling the country away to the bankers while I'm here, right? So in 1828 he runs again, right? And Jackson, there's a couple of things we can mention. The first is tactically, Jackson pitches himself as a man of the people. I'm an ordinary dude. Now, Jackson is very rich. He owns a lot of slaves. He's very, very wealthy. But to be fair, he came from nothing, right? He was a very poor kid in South Carolina. So he sort of says, look, I'm an example of what you can do in America. You can start out being poor and you can be rich. You can go anywhere. He does the American dream. He does it. And he says, look, every president we have had, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, they've all been from the East. It's 4 Virginian dudes and 2 dudes named Adams, and they're all founding father dude bros, right? Washington, Adams, and then Jefferson, and then Madison, the father of the Constitution. Monroe is, if you see the famous picture by the German guy depicting Jefferson, Washington crossing the Delaware. It's Emanuel Leutze. I just needed a minute to get it there. It's Leutze. Leutze has the whole picture is shit. It's totally shit. But the picture has Washington standing there like an idiot in the open boat, like a moron is going to tip the damn boat. But the guy holding the flag is James Monroe, right? And so Jackson was right to say, look, there's basically a cabal of founding father Easterners running the fucking country, right? It's a bunch of dudes who knew each other in the Revolutionary War. That shit was like 50 years ago, right? Like, let's move on. And it's a compelling argument. Shouldn't it be time for somebody to run the country who's not part of this little clique? Right? Also, what about a Westerner, right? I'm from South Carolina, but like whatever. I basically live in Tennessee my whole adult life. I'm from senator from Tennessee, right? I sat in the U.S. Senate from Tennessee. As governor of Tennessee. It's a compelling argument. A lot of Westerners from newly open states like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, they think this guy is like us. He cares about the stuff we care about, right? And so, and that's a very compelling kind of argument to make. Now, strategically, nominating the president had been a complicated thing in the aristocratic politics of the 1700s. There's a really good book, by the way, about this called Affairs of Honor, and it's by a woman who's like Joanna something, and she wrote a sequel called Fields of Blood about Congress in the 1830s, 40s, 50s. But she pointed out that in the 1780s and 90s, the American politicians operated in this really schizophrenic system where they inherited this kind of aristocratic social and political mode from the British. That was just how politics were done. So they kind of copied them. But at the same time, politics was Democratic, Republican, right? I mean, we were now all in a republic. We all voted and stuff, right? So they didn't quite know how to square that circle, right? They didn't quite know how to figure that out. And so they kind of had this politics, democratic politics, that sort of retained a touch of the aristocratic elements in it, right? And so you didn't nominate yourself for president. That's crass. You didn't go out and say, I want to be president. You don't want to be president. Instead, you feel that you have to be president because it's necessary for the government to have you. But that's also egotistical. Like, only I can save the country. Well, who the fuck made you Superman, you asshole? And so instead, you have to have other people ask you to be president, right? And you have to say, if somebody nominated me, I guess I would serve, but it's not my business. And then other people are like, no, you have to come save us. Only you, only Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're our only help. You're the only one that can help us, or whatever. You're our only hope. And And it's sort of this weird thing where you, and of course, by the 1820s, you would basically get a newspaper that was sympathetic to you to ask you to run, and then you would accept, but it was all kind of bullshit. It was all kind of staged, right? And so, a lot of people felt like, these politics were kind of personal. I mean, people would run, and you're like, I agree with that guy on every issue, but I hate him, so I'm going to run against him. So whatever. And so what Jackson decided to do was organize a nominating convention, right? Now today we have nominating conventions. They're totally pointless, right? The 2016 convention was alive, the Republican one, because there was a chance that Republicans might not all nominate Trump, and that was fantastic. A floor fight at a convention would be amazing. And instead, all we got was a bunch of crazy soap opera stuff. Melania gave a speech that Michelle Obama gave, and it was like, ooh. And then Ted Cruz went up there and basically said, vote for who you want to vote, not Donald Trump. And everybody booed at him, and it was like, wow, exciting. Yeah. But like most conventions, we have a primary. Am I out of the frame? Okay. We have a primary system. So when you get to the convention, you already know who's the nominee. You already know who it's going to be. And so Jackson decided to do something like this, but without a primary. What the convention that Jackson organizes would do is literally choose who the nominee is going to be. The convention would choose who the nominee is going to be. You'd have a big party. All the
They sound like a thunderstorm. It's actually just
Ooh.
in so many ways.
Yeah, it's exciting. Fang will run occasionally, and sometimes he will sleep hump, which is hilarious. Yeah, I assume she just wanted a drink. Yeah, drink. Yeah.
Well, he asked me.
It was unclear exactly what you were doing too. Yeah.
And then it says there has to be some sort of narcissism in order to run for president.
I think.
Some are more narcissistic.
Yeah, I think part of it is that you get a guy like Clinton who realizes at a young age that he loves the crowds. He loves people shouting for him, and I mean it's like a drug, right? I mean, and I get Trump held rallies all the time, and it must have felt good. You go out there and you're like, hey, what's up, everybody? And they're like, woo, and they have your hat, they have your picture on their T-shirts. I mean, yeah, I mean that's got to be a lot of fun, And to have a crowd of people, I will admit, as a teacher, it is pretty cool when I walk into a room and I start talking and everybody shuts up and like pays attention and is like, okay, and it's like that's pretty kind of neat. Well, I mean, at home, I get a bunch of blank screens, or yeah, I get the kid eating his toenails or whatever. So.
Oh, that wasn't even what I meant.
Oh no, at home, no one cares what I say.
Yes, you should share some of your anecdotes from Zoom.
Well, I mean, the two wild things I've had. Well, there's up and down. The two bad things I had. So I had a lady, and I feel so bad. She got up to shut the door of her room, and she was wearing her underwear. And so she got up and like went over and shut the door because it was like loud in her house. And I only think a couple people saw, but I was like, oh my god, she's wearing her underwear. But then a couple weeks ago, a kid leaned back on the bed, and he just like grabbed his foot and was like, oh, my toenails are long, and reached up and stuck his foot in his mouth. And it was like, no. And so I at that point, when the lady with the underwear, that was like the first week. And so I was like, I don't know what to do. But this kid, I just muted his video. I was like, video, we don't need to see that. So yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah. And so I don't even know what I was talking about. Okay, nominating conventions. So the trick with Jackson is that you have a nominating convention, and rather than having primaries, instead you just have all the delegates from all the state parties get together and pick a dude. And you pitch it as, look, we can only run one dude. We can't run Frankenstein's monster. We can't run a committee. We have to run one dude. So we're just going to pick a dude and pick me. Right? And then everybody support me. All the parties support me. There's no competition. And in your lane of the presidential race, there will be only you, and everybody will support you. And it's huge. It's the nuclear bomb of American politics. The opposition to Jackson that develops never does this because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. What if we have a convention and a Westerner got nominated and Easterners didn't want to vote for Westerner? I don't know, bitch. You can't run two people for fucking president. So you're going to have to get over it, right? What about if we got a guy from the North and Southerners want to vote for him? I don't know, bitch. You can't vote for two people president. Pick somebody. And so Jackson pushed the idea that all of the anti-federalists, all the Democratic parties could nominate one guy, him, and two things. He could, now you run with the vice president. So he would run with the vice president. You can pick somebody to balance me out. I'm a Westerner, pick an Easterner. I'm a Northerner, pick a Southerner. Also, I will make promises. I will support. You tell me what you like. We have a platform. I will pledge to support it. And the opposition to Jackson runs like 5 guys. Every election they run like 5 guys, and they get their ass kicked because guess what? You can't run 5 guys against one guy and have the one guy lose, right? That's never going to happen, right? So anyway, Jackson does this. It completely reorganizes American politics. There's nothing like it until 1960 when Kennedy runs TV ads and does quite well, or 2008 where Obama raises a ton of money on the internet, or even 2016 where Donald Trump basically runs a non-campaign, doesn't have any staff, just runs a bunch of Facebook ads and has rallies and wins. And there's a lot of political consultants who get paid a shitload of money to run campaigns who lost their jobs and are not going to get them back anytime soon because that's not how they ran campaigns. And yet he won. So I guess maybe I don't need all this crap, right? And so I mean that was a big change, right? He basically didn't bother doing all the crap you're quote supposed to do, and it turned out okay, right? I mean, there was a lot of other things going on, but he certainly made an argument that you can run a much less complicated campaign staff and have a much more skeletal operation and focus on internet fundraising, and you could still be competitive. And he was, right? He was running Facebook ads and he was running TV ads, and I mean, people were seeing them, right? And so again, a lot of consultants who make a lot of money running traditional campaigns don't do that. And they were probably like, he can't win, and then he won, and it was like, oh shit, I guess that guy just talked me out of a job. So the other thing we got to mention though is there was some gossip in the campaign. So Jackson's married to this lady, Rachel Robards, right? Rachel Jackson, and it's fine. It's a marriage, right? Whatever. Except newspapers sympathetic to the Adams campaign pick up gossip about her. This is serious. So it turns out that she had been married before. Huge red flag. Okay, she's been married before. Remember, if you get married in the 19th century, that's it for life. And if you get unmarried for whatever reason, you should either die or go into the attic and wrap yourself in black clothes and just look out the window like a creepy old vampire lady forever, right? Because you're a widow or something. And so it turns out she didn't do that. Her husband had divorced her, or she got a divorce from him, which is today like who cares? But in 1820 whatever, it was like holy shit. But it turns out, funny story, when she and Andrew Jackson got married, she wasn't actually divorced from her husband because, like, I guess she thought he had signed the divorce papers, but he hadn't or whatever. So it's a completely non-issue. It's a completely non-story. They didn't do anything that was bad. When they found out that she was technically already legally married, they annulled their marriage. They found him, they got him to sign the papers, and then they got remarried. So snooze fest. But when the newspapers pick it up, they're like, "Holy shit, Rachel Jackson is probably a bigamist." And remember, what's a one-word name for a woman who violates accepted sexual and social norms in the 19th century? I mean, and we're all thinking it prostitute, whore. So I mean, and the newspapers like call her that. And it's like the crappiest thing in the world. Like, she didn't do anything wrong. She's not a bad person. She just got a divorce and got remarried, and there was like a paperwork mix-up, right? But there's all this talk about how she secretly married Andrew Jackson to take his money, or it was like a con artist thing. And she was already I mean, probably we should just tie a rock to her and throw her in the pond anyway, right? If she floats, she's fine, right? I'm just saying. Yeah, no, she's saying she's a witch, like sarcastically. Yeah, no.
No. If you sink, you're not a witch, and you go to heaven. If
Yeah.
you float, you're a witch,
Yeah.
and they'll burn you at the stake.
Right. So it's a safe bet. It's fine. She'll either die or she'll die, and it's fine. Yeah. I mean, look. All I know is I looked this up in the Malleus Maleficarum, the 16th century witch hunter's handbook, and it had a bunch of stuff about setting people on fire. So it's probably what we're gonna need to do. Okay. Look, that's a for real legit book. Okay, some guy wrote that about witch hunting, and it's the accepted Catholic book about what. Yeah, I mean, like, look, you got to have a book to learn about this stuff. What are you going to do if you go to you're a member of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, and you're like, guys, I need to know about witches, and they're like, bro, you just need a copy of this bad boy. Yeah, they literally have a manual, and you're just going to read that, right? So you tie her to her. My favorite is they crush them under a flat rock, and if they have to put more rocks on you to kill you, well, then you were probably not a witch, but like it's okay though. So their heart was in the right place. Yeah. Remember, the Spanish Inquisition used to burn people alive because that way they didn't shed any blood, because they're not supposed. Catholic priests aren't supposed to shed blood. So it's cool though. We just set him on fire. I set the guy on fire. He didn't bleed. Nobody bled. No, there's no blood. No. And so, I mean, we totally can. Isabella of Castile set that bad boy up to get off those conversos. Look, those conversos said they converted from Judaism to Catholicism, but do you really believe him? Is Manuel the Jew? Is he really celebrating Christmas, or is he down in the basement doing Hanukkah? Because if he is, we're going to pull his fingernails until he tells us. Right? We're going to set him on fire. We're going to find out. It's necessary to ask these conversos. And I mean, look, funny story. Every person you put on a rack and you pull their fingernails out, they confess that they are secretly still a Jew. So it's probably my accuracy is 100%.
Do you stop if you get?
Well, yeah, and then they're probably already dead. They die anyway of shock. But I mean, look, 100% of the people we question end up confessing. So we must be doing something right. Yeah. So okay, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing in 1492 Spain. It's all Isabel of Castile.
All right, so we slandered Rebecca Jackson with.
So yeah, so Rachel Donaldson, Rachel Robards. Well, actually, Jackson had been in a couple duels, and he had a bunch of health problems. He had bullets in his body that they never extracted, and so he had terrible health problems. He had like a breakdown in like 1822, where he had like just the doctors were like, "Dude, your body is wrecked." Like just yeah. Actually, at one point, as president, somebody tried to assassinate him on the steps of the Capitol. They pulled a gun and misfired, and he beat the shit out of the guy with the cane, and they had to like pull him off the guy. Yeah. And so I forget who Jackson said it about, but he said one of the guys who dueled him. He said, "I hated him so much. If he shot me and killed me, I would have lived long enough to kill him and then died. And I would just clap my hand over the wound and killed him and then died because I hated him so much." And so I mean, yeah, he had like 2 or 3 bullets in his body from duels that he had fought. And as they said about Adams, they said, "Do you want a leader who can write, or do you want a man who can fight?" Right. And it's like Jackson is a kick-ass frontiersman who kills British soldiers and Indians. Adams is a nerd. So I just and it's like, look, the president isn't actually gonna. It's not idiocracy where we have like the president has to actually fight people. It's like a metaphor and stuff. He had a gun and stuff. He intimidated Congress. He had to intimidate.
That was just because the president lost the
Right. Well, but I mean, like, maybe he needs to. It's a really good movie. It's the best movie. Yeah.
No, it's on.
Yeah, it's old. It's pretty old. Yeah.
We can stream it totally.
Yeah, if our viewers haven't seen the movie Idiocracy, you should watch it and be depressed because so much of it is becoming true. It's Brondo. It's what plants crave. It's got electrolytes. Brought to you by Carl's Jr. Why do you keep saying that? And they pay me every time I say it. Brought to you by Carl's Jr.
I wish they say that.
Yeah, we're not sponsored, but we're looking. And so, Wicked Barley sponsor us. I mean, currently, whoever's making this Chianti, I'm sure this Chianti should sponsor me. Who is this? Rufino from 1877. It's a product of Italy. Although it's got a screw top, so it can't be that fancy. That's yeah.
Look, pork is expensive and hard to come by.
That's true. I mean,
naturally occurring product.
It's expensive and hard to come by.
I mean, I guess they have to make it. They have to. Yeah. I mean, whatever. Look, they're doing amazing things with screw tops these days. So what happens to Rachel? She dies. She has a literal stress-induced heart attack and dies. And Jackson buries her in the gown in which she would have worn to his inauguration. He literally bought her a dress to dance with him at his inauguration, and it's her burial gown. And he said, when they buried her, they lowered her into the coffin, into the ground. He said, "I hope to God that he shall forgive her murderers because I never will," which is classic Jackson, right? And Jackson blamed his political opponents. They killed her, he said, as surely as if they stuck a knife in her ribs. They killed her. And so Jackson goes to Washington. By the way, his vice president, South Carolina Senator John C. Calhoun, who transitioned from the Adams to the Jackson administration smoothly, right? And it was thought that Jackson wasn't going to win any votes in the Northeast because Adams is running. So he got a Southerner to run. So it's a Westerner and a Southerner. Western and the Southerner together is 2/3 of the country, right? Do you have a question? Is there a question?
Teresa just commented, why Trump has Jackson painting.
It would, yeah. I mean, to be totally fair, just as an intellectual exercise, Jackson, a blustery populist, disdainful of institutions, and confident that he represents the will of the people, is absolutely someone who you would want to have in a Trump White House. I mean, that would be the president most like Donald Trump, right? On the 20, yeah, with Harry Tubman, because the stupid Treasury.
The $10 bill has Alexander Hamilton
He made the money. Yeah, he made the money. Yeah.
But there's the whole movement to replace Andrew Jackson with Harry Tubman.
Harry Tubman. Yeah. Trump stopped it. Yeah.
Because
we can't have nice things. Yeah, and if anybody should not be on the 20 or on money, it should be Jackson, who fought against the government even having the kind of financial system where they issue currency. So, I mean, and for a while the Treasury's like, well, we'll put Harry Tubman on the 10. And it's like, bitch, Alexander Hamilton needs to be on the money because he's the reason we have paper money. So, like you might not like Hamilton if you're like a Republican because he was for a strong government. That's fine. But like, he should probably be on the money, right? Because he's the reason you're holding it. But anyway, whatever. So Jackson becomes president, and there's a few things you got to understand about Jackson's presidency. They have to talk about right off the bat. I'll tell you, the inauguration is the thing. There's this big party, and Jackson is like, he doesn't have a date. The fuck, he doesn't care, and his wife is dead. So he throws open the White House and says to all the people in the street, "Hey, you ordinary people, you voted for me. Come in and celebrate. I'm your president." And they just flood the White House. They wreck the place. They trash it. It's like the Hangover opening scene. It's just like mud everywhere. There's there's a baby hanging in the closet, right? And they actually have to smuggle Jackson out of the White. No, he was in a. Yeah, he was in a bouncy thing. He was in. It's Carlos with the sunglasses. Come on, the Hangover people. Come on. Yeah, but wasn't his name initially Carlos? That's what they called him. Yeah. 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 But did you die? And so, yeah, they have to smuggle Jackson out of the White House because they're like, oh, Mr. President, the house might collapse. So they like throw him out a window and get him into some other building. And the next morning, it's like a fucking scene of devastation. And the Jackson's opponents are like, look, this is what happens when ordinary people are involved because they're just drunk idiots. And Jackson's like, man, these are my voters. Like they had a party. Like it's fine. Like they. Yeah. I mean, and smashed everything. Yeah. And we should mention part of the reason this matters is because in between 18, like about 20 and 28, when Jackson wins, what happens is most states relaxed requirements for voting to the point where adult men could vote regardless of property. And so all of a sudden you had what's called universal manhood suffrage. If you were an adult man, you could vote. You didn't have to own property. You just had to be a resident. You just had to say, I live in Connecticut. Connecticut will let you vote. And the Jackson's opponents didn't do anything to get those voters, but Jackson went after them, right? I'm an ordinary guy just like you, right? You're a regular guy. I'm a regular guy. What? Yeah, people who have been left out or whatever, yeah. In a way, it was Teresa that mentioned Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump is the most Jacksonian president we have had, probably, I think ever. I think in terms of the sort of like populism and the sort of bluster and the disdain of institutions, and as Tim mentions, going after people who have been like not included. There are a lot of reasons to. I mean, he's important, but doesn't make him a great guy, right? He reorganizes the political system, and we're all living in his world in the 1830s, right? I mean, there's a great book by Arthur Schlesinger called The Age of Jackson, which one reviewer called a wonderfully thinly disguised parable about why the New Deal is great. Because it was basically justification for the New Deal written in the 1930s. But at the same time, it was not wrong to call the Age of Jackson the Age of Jackson, right? I mean, it was an age defined by the political choices he made. So what can we say about Jackson? Well, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the tariff. In 1828, the Congress passed a law raising taxes on imported goods, British goods. The reason they did this is that the British companies were importing higher quality and cheaper merchandise than many American companies, was running American companies out of work. And they passed this law specifically targeting manufacturing in areas that needed to vote for Jackson. And so they called it the Tariff of 1828. One historian calls it the tariff. It was a political commentator called it a tariff on no manufacturers save that of a president. It was intended. What's that? But it was intended so that Jackson can go to your state and say, hey, because we passed that tariff, prices on British goods have gone up. You guys are having a lot of growth, right? Your jobs are doing good. Your company is getting orders, right? Because their products are now cheaper than the British stuff. Democrats did that for you, so vote for me, right? And it worked. It helped to get Jackson in the White House, right? And of course, Jackson didn't like the tariff. He didn't think the government should do it. But you can't shit on something. A, your party did it. So we're a party. We were together. We do it. B, it helped make you president. You can't turn around and crap on it, right? Have we gone on too long?
No, I got it.
Oh, okay.
Within 1 hour.
Okay, we're still going. We got top stuff about. And so, having said that,
30 to 45 minutes.
I mean, it's Jackson. We'll go as long as we go. Okay, we have to. Is this important? And so you can understand why Jackson supported the tariff because your party did it. So that's part of being a party. Being a party man is to say, look, my party doesn't always do what I want, but I agree with them. Why? Because it's necessary. Because it's important, right? And the second thing is that it helped make you president. You can't crap on something that helped get you elected, right? On the other hand, the Southerners didn't like the tariff, and the reason is economically. The way the South worked is you get land, you clear it, you get slaves, you plant cotton, you grow the cotton, you export it to England, you sell it, you buy British goods, manufactured goods, high quality stuff, can't get in America, import it back, sell it. The entire Southern economy, from basically Maryland to Louisiana, Texas, runs on that. Right? In Maryland, what they're really doing is selling their slaves into South Carolina because you can't grow cotton in Maryland, so whatever. But the big thing in the 1820s and 30s is selling your slaves in Maryland, Virginia, south and west to South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, East Texas. Yeah. The North. Tim asks, did America not have the infrastructure to process their own textiles into cotton? The answer is not really. They not enough. As it turns out, the North had textile mills, but not enough to absorb the supply. And the British economy was industrializing. This is the literal industrial revolution is happening. And the British economy industrialized textiles first. That was the first industry to get industrialized. And they had the demand for textiles the British had was essentially infinite. And so it absorbed way more than even America could produce because they produce stuff in other places as well. And so if you're an American Southerner, you would be like, I'd like to sell that crap up north, but they only buy like a tenth of what we make. And there's always somebody willing to pay, right? And the British had what they call perfect demand, where the demand for textiles in the British economy was so high that they would buy literally any amount that was produced. There was not like you couldn't saturate the market. It was processed. And I mean, every British person is buying shirts, socks, underwear, drapes, sheets, tablecloths, napkins, upholstery in cotton because it's so inexpensive. I was answering.
I know you were, but look this way.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a good point. The demand in the North wouldn't really be enough to capture Southern supply until like the Civil War. And it was and they built textile mills in North because it was cheaper you build a mill. Lowell, Massachusetts had all the textile mills, so they built them all, processed it, and sold it to people in like New England and stuff. But it was only like a fraction of what the Southerners were capable of producing, and the British paid hard currency, and then you could buy British manufactured goods, particularly gunpowder, wrought iron. You could buy manufactured metal machinery. Stuff that you couldn't get in the States. It was expensive to get in the States. And then you imported it south. And like the entire Southern economy is dependent on that. So the tariff correctly is identified by the Southerners as essentially a tax on their life, right? I mean, it's like a tax on their way of doing business. And they don't like it. So like what do they do? Well, along comes John C. Calhoun, who complains bitterly about the tariff in public. And Jackson's attitude is, look, you're the vice president. Lyndon Johnson said it best. He said, when I want loyalty from somebody, I want loyalty from them. And he said, that means that if I drop my pants in the window of Macy's Fifth Avenue and I get them to kiss it, they tell everybody it smells like roses. And that's Lyndon Johnson. I mean, in a way, yes. Although I like Lyndon Johnson, so we're not going to make that comparison. And that was Lyndon Johnson, right? It was like, you're part of the team. We're all pulling together. We can't have people naysaying, right? And when the Southerners attacked the tariff of 1828, which they called, by the way, the tariff of abominations, right? Jackson got furious. I mean, you can't shit on this thing that got me elected president, right? If Congress didn't want to do it, don't do it. But they did it, so let's just get on board. And so there are early stirrings of discontent between Jackson and Calhoun, right? And so along comes my favorite thing in American politics, the petticoat affair. And this is amazing. Jackson's kind of a widower, right? So he goes in the White House. There's nobody to do the social stuff, right? There's nobody to do the social stuff. Yeah, his wife died. Okay, so he's literally a widower. Okay, so he's a widower. Jeez.
I mean, he's a lawyer. So
what is it? Yeah, I'm fine. Serious scrutiny, regular scrutiny, normal scrutiny. Yeah.
Which is not a thing.
I mean, I don't know. I heard a lawyer say it in a press conference, so it must be true.
That's a lawyer.
He has a law degree. He's, as far as I know, he was admitted to the bar to practice in the state of New York.
And you made it's breaking news that lawsuit was dismissed today.
Of course it was. Yeah.
Interesting argument though, but not for the moment.
Which one was that? Which state was that? Pennsylvania. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's not. I mean, like you said earlier, if Trump is awarded the state of Michigan through some means, it's not going to change the outcome of the election.
Also, we're all going to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody's going to believe that it's. Well, I mean, 88% of his supporters think that the election was stolen from him anyway. So at this point, who knows, right? It's a very surreal situation. So he's a widower, and remember, not. Okay. I guess I have, because that I guess that sounded like a thing that I know about my brain. But anyway, and not very many presidents have been widowers or not married. Somebody got married in the White House. I want to say it was it Taft? I don't think it was. No, I don't think so.
The one who replaced the chef and was a really good cook.
That's Eleanor Roosevelt, who hired Miss Nesbitt, who was the worst.
Okay.
No, but no, that wasn't it. And
I feel like you told me it was Taft.
maybe.
I know it's only because you told me.
And then and to be fair, we only had one bachelor, who was Buchanan, who was probably gay. He did get married to Edith Bowling Galt while he was in office, but he was also a widower because his wife died during his first term. So yes, it's true. Woodrow Wilson did get married to Edith Bowling Galt. Fun story. What did Edith Bowling Galt do when Woodrow Wilson proposed to her? What'd she say? Nothing. She didn't say anything, but she did fall out of bed. Because they were sleeping together and she was already in bed. It was a sex thing. It was a sex joke. Also, imagine Woodrow Wilson having sex. You can't unsee that.
I don't actually know what he looks like, so
I don't know what Woodrow Wilson looks like. Haunts my dreams.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't put him on a dollar bill, so.
And they should not, because he's an asshole.
It's $1.
No, I mean we can't be having Woodrow Wilson on our money. He's the worst. Cleveland. Did Cleveland get married in the White House? Yeah, he did. He did. It was Grover Cleveland. He was. What I remember about Grover Cleveland is that he had emergency secret cancer surgery in New York Harbor because he had a cancerous tumor in his jaw from smoking too many cigarettes. Do you know that?
No,
Oh, okay. But I guess he also was the only president to get married in the White House. So anyway, Jackson is a bachelor, a widower, and the White House is like dead. Like, I mean, I get it. You know, you're a widower. You get up, you go to work, and you eat your food out of a pot over the kitchen sink, and then you go to sleep. I mean, whatever. What do you need napkins for? What do you need dishes for? What do you need pots for? And what do you? I mean, like, yeah, he wasn't a fancy guy. He wasn't like, oh, let's set out the crystal for the whatever. And so the social season in Washington was organized around the White House state dinners, and they weren't happening. So this lady in Washington ends up getting married to the Secretary of War, Secretary Eaton, and her name is Peggy Eaton. And Peggy Eaton is an exciting lady. It turns out in her previous life, she had already been married, red flag, and her father had run a riverboat on the Mississippi River, red flag, and she had worked on the riverboat, red flag, as a waitress, red flag, in the bar, red flag, on the riverboat, like quadruple red flag. And so all of a sudden, this gossip started to emerge in Washington about the kind of lady that Peggy Eaton actually was. And for Jackson, it's a complete redo of his wife, right? It's the same thing. They're attacking this innocent lady who, and we meant the gossip circles because she sort of gets appointed kind of unofficial first lady in that she sort of organizes all the parties so that there are parties, and she organizes the state dinners so there are state dinners, and she accompanies Jackson to the official functions because he has to kind of bring somebody to sort of greet all the ladies and stuff. And so it's not anything suspicious. It's just that there sort of has to be a hostess. And she's like, look, if nobody's going to do it, like we got to have somebody to do this. The entire social season in Washington is organized around people going to the White House and nobody's doing it. So she sort of shows up one day and is like, look, I'm going to plan a party. And they're like, whatever, do it. But of course, then these stories about her reputation emerge, and they end up actually being the subject of a cabinet meeting. And the cabinet is like, look, Mr. President, there have been some comments in the media about Miss Eaton and her unsavory reputation. And Jackson stands up, scatters a bunch of papers on the floor, and pounds on the desk, screaming, she is as pure as the driven snow, right? Legendary temper, Jackson. And he's furious. This is the same shit they did to my wife. This lady stepped out of bounds and they crushed her, right? And so the best part about it, my favorite story to tell in the entirety of American history almost, is they have a big state dinner, and there is a confrontation between Andrew Jackson and John C. Calhoun, right? So John C. Calhoun has been arguing that South Carolina. Yeah, he's the vice president. Yeah, he's the vice president. Calhoun has been arguing that South Carolina shouldn't be obligated to follow the tariff because it's bad for South Carolina. So Jackson gives a toast and he says, to our union and liberty together forever. And Calhoun interrupts him and stands up and says, to the union, next to my liberty, it is the most dear, right? My liberty is most important. The union is next. And Jackson is furious, like, motherfucker, you can't undercut me in front of all of the people, right? I give a toast and you immediately shoot me down. The fuck is that? Right? And so Daniel Webster from, I think it's Connecticut, gives a speech in the Senate where he says, together, our union and our liberty together forever, lest they separate and be drenched in fraternal blood. An eerie prophecy that the severing of the idea of union from liberty would lead to a civil war, right? And so in the middle of all of this, Jackson goes to a state dinner, and Miss Eaton is with him. They're walking in, and Calhoun's wife, Floride Calhoun, her name is Floride Calhoun. She pipes up in the sotto voce whisper when you want to whisper, but everyone should hear you, but you need to pretend you're whispering so that you can act like nobody heard you. And she says, I won't sit at a table with that woman, because she's, of course, a prostitute, right? She was a barmaid in a tavern on a steamboat in the Mississippi River. She was turning tricks when she was 15, right? Are you kidding me? And so Florida Calhoun's like, I'm not going to sit. I'm a good Southern lady. I don't sit at a table with a prostitute. And so Calhoun is like, whatever, lady, we'll do it. And he backs his wife. And Jackson is humiliated. He's bringing this nice lady to escort her to the dinner. She's his +1. She's been a very nice, reasonable person who's tried to take care of us and done all this stuff. And what you're going to do is you're going to humiliate her and, by extension, me in public. That's incredibly rude, right? And so it's a huge moment for Jackson. It's this incredibly humiliating moment where the private gossip that has been whispered all over Washington sort of bursts into public, right? And so Jackson ends up in a full-on feud with Calhoun, right? And so Calhoun ends up resigning and going back to South Carolina. Over his political issues and over this. Jackson fundamentally can't trust the guy, so whatever, he's gone. And so then all of a sudden, a pamphlet appears in South Carolina. It's called Exposition and Protest. And the pamphlet argues, in the 1790s, when the Adams administration passed the Sedition Act that made it a crime to criticize the government, Patrick Henry argued that states faced with the unconstitutional exercise of federal power could simply ignore unconstitutional federal laws, nullifying them, and make the federal government enforce them. Make the federal government exercise the effort to enforce unconstitutional laws, but the states should not be required to enforce federal laws that violate the Bill of Rights. So this pamphlet argues that, expanding on Henry's argument about nullification, that if a law benefits some states but hurts other states, then any state should feel free to nullify it at will. To just ignore the federal law. And the pamphlet is anonymous, right? Of course. Well, like, you need about 2 seconds to figure out that John C. Calhoun wrote this shit. I mean, come on, right? It's like, yeah. And so what if a dude, anonymous dude, wrote a book? It's a 900-page novel. It's about Maine. There's a town in Maine. It's actually really bad. Small towns are bad. And it's about a bunch of kids who use the power of belief and friendship to collectively defeat a shape-shifting monster that turns into a spider and a clown that lives in the sewers and feeds on fear. And if someone wrote that novel and it was anonymous, you would say it's not anonymous. Stephen King wrote the shit out of that. Of course he did. Who else would write that? No one else would write that novel. And that is, by the way, that's the plot of the novel It, which is Stephen King's best novel. If you disagree, get off my YouTube channel. I don't care. You don't even like It? What did he write that was better than It? Okay. Because if you said The Stand, I was going to burn this place down, because The Stand is actually among his worst novels. You should not read it. It's not good. The Shining, it's a copyright issue. Yeah, we don't say that. We don't have the rights to that. I mean, I liked The Shining. I like Doctor Sleep, but they're not as good as it. It is head and shoulders above anything else he wrote, with the possible exception of 11/22/63 or Under the Dome, which are also. No, we don't watch. No, we don't count. We don't. No, 11/22/63 was apparently a TV series on Amazon. Was supposed to be pretty good. It's James Franco in it. Yeah, he's the main character. No, the Under the Dome series was a god awful. No, it was awful. Did you read the book? No, the book was 100 million times better. Like 100 million times better. It was not even. The Mist is the one exception. The short story is good, but the movie was better. And yeah. The ending actually. The ending was Stephen King actually was like, damn, I wish I thought of that ending. Yeah, that was a good ending. I mean, it wasn't a good ending, but it was a good ending. It's the Mist. Yeah, it's a Stephen King. Yeah, you got to read some Stephen King. I gave you some Stephen King. I gave you The Dead Zone. The Dead Zone is good, but it's not the best Stephen King. It's interesting, but it's not the best. Tommyknockers is I mean, Needful Things. You got to have Needful Things, or Salem's Lot, or I mean, Stephen King is I honestly, a buddy of mine in college had Thinner. Was also a buddy of mine in college had a teacher who, yeah, 4 different seasons. Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption. Yeah, pretty straight up. But a buddy of mine in college had a high school teacher who it said to him, English teacher, who said, I think when your kids or your grandkids are in school, they will study Stephen King as like one of the great 20th century American novelists. And at the time he was like, lol. But like he said, by the time I got into college and I thought about it, I was like, actually kind of, what's that? It's not Tom Clancy. Early Tom Clancy is solid. Mid to late Tom Clancy, he got to the point where he told his editors, like, I don't need to edit my books. I do what I want. And he wrote like a 1,700-page book. It was like 7 novels. And it was like, bitch, this is 4 books. And he was like, and then it was like, and then they started putting a crap that was under his name that was garbage. And it was like, well, they made him money. To be fair, some of the games, he developed video games that were really good. Politico and Ruthless.com. Some of his Rainbow Six was a really good video game. We got to talk about Rainbows. Yeah, I'm just saying. And yeah, so the Petticoat Affair explodes Andrew Dice's cabinet and ends up with a permanent breach between him and South Carolina. And by the way, it escalates into a straight up confrontation because South Carolina threatens to secede from the Union over the tariff. And what they do is they're going to nullify the tariff. And if you nullify the tariff, what everybody would do is just import British goods to South Carolina and then transmit them domestically to the other states, which would essentially nullify the idea of a tariff. And of course, ultimately, if anybody can opt out of federal laws, there are no federal laws. There's just no point in having laws. And what's the point, right?
I don't like this.
It doesn't benefit me, so I guess the law against robbery doesn't apply while I rob you.
Okay, but how do you allow states to go against federal law? It's a big proponent of legal marijuana, but Colorado did. Nationally, it's legal.
Yeah.
Colorado's like, hey.
I mean, yes. Tim mentions Colorado, for example, legalizing marijuana. Essentially, what Colorado argued was that.
I'm not against that.
I guess the difference also is that in the 19th century, some of the states enforced federal law, whereas now what Colorado is basically saying is, look, if you want to arrest people for marijuana on the streets of Colorado, the DEA can certainly do that. We can't stop them. But like Colorado is just not going to make it a crime. So like the Colorado state government is not going to arrest you for possession of marijuana. We can't stop them. Yeah. And we won't help them in the sense that like if the DEA comes to the like Boulder, city police department and is like, we got some marijuana dealers, they're going to be like, well, that's not really illegal according to us. Now you guys can do we can't stop you, but we're not going to like aid you. But Yeah, and what South Carolina is saying is we're actively going to our local tax collectors aren't going to collect federal taxes. Imagine if South Carolina told today its employers, if you're an employer in South Carolina, we think the income tax doesn't apply, so just don't collect it from your workers. And we're just not going to do that. We're just not yeah, but it depends on the compliance of the individual employers in states to collect the tax and forward it to the federal government. And so what if your boss at your store was like, well, I decide I don't like the federal income tax, so I'm not going to pay it. And you're like, and he's like, well, I don't care what you do, but then you have to go pay it yourself. I mean, it's like that's weird. And what if individual South Carolina businesses were like, well, federal regulations say that I have to give you an 8-hour workday or pay you or there's a federal minimum wage. I don't want to do it. So I'm just going to pay you $1 an hour because I don't think the minimum wage is cool. And it's like you can't just do that, right? I mean, you can't just opt out of laws. Yes.
I mean, you say that their minimum wage laws have definitely existed, but we definitely have throughout history people of color who are paid well below minimum wage because they had no ability to actually get those laws enforced.
Yeah. Well, Darren mentions enforcement. She mentions specifically people of color being paid less than minimum wage laws and so it's complicated because all federal laws rely on to a degree of enforcement. Like, for example, if the police catch you for something that's a federal crime, they can arrest you and then turn it over to the feds. I guess they probably couldn't arrest you, but they could alert the feds to this. Hey, by the way, there are people smuggling parrots or something. And then that's serious. There are laws about importing animals.
There absolutely are. They're terrible when you actually see the videos.
Yeah, but I mean, they could turn that over to the Customs and Border Patrol, right? Or for example, the good one is what about undocumented immigrants, right? Where if you're the police in San Antonio, Texas, it's not your responsibility to catch illegal immigrants. But if you catch a bunch of illegal immigrants, do you you can't just let them go? Do you and the big thing, the reason that we have sanctuary cities is because what the feds would say is if you catch someone who's an undocumented immigrant for drunk driving and you arrest him for drunk driving, we want you to if you let him out, right? If you end up letting him out on parole or something, we actually want you to hold him until we can come and pick him up, because then we'll do deportation. And of course, at one point I think it was some city in Texas was like, well, we can hold him for 48 hours, but after he's not supposed to be in jail. We can't just detain this guy illegally. And the federal government's like, it will take 2 months. And we can't just put people in jail for months because you said so. And so that really raises questions about where's the responsibility of the federal government versus the states, right? But South Carolina in 18 kind of it is, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you can understand California's look, we can't afford to keep thousands of people in jail while the federal government gets around to deporting them, because it would cost our taxpayers millions of dollars, right? I mean, this guy's in jail. He needs a cell, clothes, food, medical care, water, whatever. And if you're going to deport him, you take him and do it. But if you're not, it's not our problem, right? And so where is the line between federal and state law, which is not a problem that we ever solve? I mean, that's we've been fighting about that since 1789, you know? But South Carolina is basically saying, we don't like this law, so we're just going to actively ignore it. And it's you just can't do that, right? And in particular, because of the way the law works, if South Carolina ignores the tariff, then it essentially doesn't exist for any state, right? Any state that chooses to follow it is basically is a little stupid. Why should I ship my stuff to Wilmington, North Carolina? I'm going to just go to South Carolina and I don't pay taxes. And then once it's in South Carolina and it's been cleared into customs, I sell it to North Carolina and it's a domestic transfer. I don't have to pay the taxes on it. And so Jackson is furious about this for two reasons. Again, first, Calhoun has picked a fight with the government, but also this is the federal government. Jackson, all the bad stuff you can say about Jackson, racist, check, slave owner, check, hated Indians, check, asshole, check. But he believed in the union. He believed look, we are in this together. States can't just opt out of being in the United States of America because it's not super convenient for them or whatever dumb bullshit. And so when South Carolina threatens to nullify the tariff, Jackson threatens to send the army in to get them. And eventually South Carolina backs down. And the reason they back down is simple. They asked the other southern states for help. They asked the other southern states, aren't we right? Don't you agree with us? North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, whatever. And the other southern states are Jackson is going to fucking kill you. So we're not, please leave a message after the tone. Beep, And so the other southern states are absolutely convinced that Jackson would send an army into South Carolina and blow that shit up because he would have. He's a crazy guy. Yeah. No, no. In fact, if South Carolina had picked a fight with the Union in 1830, whatever, they would have won. There's a very good chance. And the irony is, this: if the Civil War had happened in 1830, the South would have won. When it happened in 1860, they didn't. Yeah. And the irony is, the difference between 1830 and 1860 is that when South Carolina in 1860 says, "Does anyone want to secede with us?" every other southern state is like, yeah, kind of, we do. Like, you're making it 30 years makes a huge difference when that 30 years is an argument about whether or not what we did in 1830 was a good idea, right? But that's the sort of the ominous thing about it, right? And so in the end, Jackson diffuses the crisis by essentially threatening to blow the shit out of South Carolina, and it works. Like, South Carolina's like, I guess if we're alone, we back off, and they end up doing a compromise where they pass an updated tariff that mostly exempts South Carolina, but preserves the legality and the legitimacy of the idea of a tariff. And that's sort of, everyone agrees that that's okay. What's that? Probably. No, Bacon is 1675, and Shays Rebellion is 17. What's that? Oh, there's also, well, I mean, there's Nat Turner, and there's also Stono, and there's also Denmark Vesey, all of whom are slaves who revolt. And Denmark Vesey gets caught in Charleston because one of the slaves involved in the conspiracy enslaved people. One of the enslaved people, prisoners of jobs. Yeah, one of the people involved actually flips on the rebellion and rats them out, and then they get caught. But it scares the crap out of the Southerners because a rebellion is being planned, like, in Charleston, South Carolina, right? And so it was like serious business. And Nat Turner revolted in Virginia and successfully killed a whole bunch of people and ended up getting caught. Again, we can talk about Denmark Vesey, a Spanish coast, a French coast in New Orleans, in Louisiana, and Denmark Vesey is a good guy. There's a bunch of books about him, and Nat Turner, right? And then we can talk about the John Brown. Yeah. We're going to talk about John Brown, who was the king of all slave rebellions, who was an abolitionist who put his life on the line to free the slaves, put his money where his mouth is, and helped to make the Civil War happen. I love John Brown, but he's kind of a psycho. And so, what's that? Kinda, he was but like, all the abolitionists were like, man, slavery's the worst, and John Brown was like, I'm gonna shoot some slave owners. How about that? And it was like, he kind of actually did free slaves. Like, he actually tried. He didn't succeed at freeing any slaves, but he was willing to go out there and die for the idea. Yeah, but on the other hand, like, he was literally a terrorist who, like, murdered a bunch of people, some of whom were only tangentially connected to slavery. But for the right reason, yeah. And so I mean, like, John Brown was like,
he did all the wrong things for all the right
kind of he did. And so here now before God and these witnesses, I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery. He said that in a church in Illinois, I think, after the passage of I think it's the Kansas-Nebraska Act, or the Fugitive Slave Act.
I'm sorry that I had to give on John Brown.
I mean, they didn't give a shit, but it's fine. John Brown is super interesting, and I hope they learned something. So anyway, John Brown. We'll have to talk about John Brown later, because John Brown is a hard guy to like. Imagine Osama bin Laden, but actually for good reasons, and you like him. And that's kind of the problem with John Brown. So anyway, what else can we say about Jackson's presidency? This thing we got to talk about. And to be totally fair, longtime friend of the show, I think Heather. I don't know if Heather. Yeah, Heather Youngblood. If she's not here, this would be what she would want me to talk about: is Indian removal. And so one of the things that Jackson did during his presidency is he ordered the military to remove Indians from the southeast, from Florida, Mississippi, South Carolina, North Carolina, and it was the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Creek, I think the Chickasaw, and the Seminole, I think. And basically what the government did is they rounded up these Indians who had treaties with the American government stipulating that they would be left alone. We rounded them up and relocated them to Oklahoma, which was then called Indian Territory. Why did Jackson do this? Well, there had been, among other things, gold discovered in Cherokee territory. And also settlers had been pushing to get into the land that these Indians owned. I want to say it was the Creek Indians owned the western part of Mississippi, which is where the Mississippi River floods the state, and it's the best soil for growing cotton in America. If you go to western Mississippi and you go out into the field and you scoop up some dirt, it's like German chocolate cake. It's this black, like thick, Heather or Puri, and then yeah, that's her. But it's like German chocolate cake. What? And so if you scoop it up, it's like it's clay. It's like it's not clay. It's like sticky. Like it's like gooey. That's the best soil for growing crops in America. And you can understand why the white settlers wanted this stuff. I mean, it was a huge pressure on Jackson. These are his constituents. These people voted for you. And so he ordered the military to go in and basically drive these Indians out. And they did. And it was terrible. It was essentially what we today call ethnic cleansing. It was awful. And they killed people, and they showed up to the Cherokee territory and told them get out in 24 hours. Pack your shit and get out. What's that? Yeah, it was a huge land grab, and it would. By the way, it was incredibly popular. Right, white Americans were thrilled that Jackson had done this for them, and the Supreme Court objected, but Jackson was like, "I don't care," which was astounding. His view was that the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the president basically had no power to interfere with each other. He had this idea that the president could basically do what he wanted. Right? Today, often you hear people in the conservative legal tradition refer to what is known as the unitary executive theory. What's that? Yeah. What? Just ignore the people who talk about the unitary executive theory?
No.
Oh, the kids? Yeah, I was saying ignore people who talk about the unitary executive theory because I disagree with their interpretation of the Constitution. But I mean, your mileage may vary. Maybe you're actually a member of the Federalist Society. I don't know. And so, having said that, Jackson kind of agreed with that. Like, I'm the president, and he said multiple times, everybody in America who voted for a person voted for me, right? Like, I'm the only person that represents all of the country, and so I have the right to do what the majority of people in America want me to do. And in this case, it was to push the Indians out. And it was terrible. It amounts to what we today call ethnic cleansing or genocide. And it was, again, immensely popular, and Jackson did it, and there's not really any way to get around it, right? His biographers have all struggled to wrap their mind around this. His Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer is Robert Remini, who goes so far as to say that Jackson actually did these Indians a favor because by relocating them, he saved them from being massacred by local whites, which is true, but also awful. And so it's a good example of how if you become enamored of a person, it can cloud your judgment, right? I would recommend, if you really wanted to read a biography of Jackson, John Meacham has one volume of Jackson in the White House. H.W. Brands has a much bigger volume of Jackson his whole life. Have you read the Jackson one? Yeah, I have that one. I haven't read that one, but it's supposed to be the best single volume, all of his life. The Meacham one is good, but like the first 20 pages is Jackson's early life, and the rest of it is the White House. So if you actually care about the Seminoles and stuff, you're not going to find it in the Meacham book, right? Meacham won the Pulitzer Prize for his. I think Brands was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. But Brands teaches University of Texas at Austin and has written biographies of Reagan, both Roosevelts, Grant, Jackson, and Franklin, and they're really good. All of his books are really good. And so Jackson sort of, clears the southeast of Indians, right? That's why there aren't Seminoles in Florida until the 20th century when they come back, basically, right? And we should mention also Jackson attacks the bank. He goes to war with the bank, and it's ingenious. He says, I hate the bank. I hate Nicholas Biddle, the director of the bank. Congress created this guy. He put him in charge. It's not even in charge of it. I hate it. And so Jackson decides to go to war with the bank, and the solution he comes up with is ingenious. He says, look, I'm the president. I control the Treasury Department, right? So he says, what if I order the Treasury, instead of collecting taxes and putting them in the national bank, I order them to put the taxes in the biggest bank in each state and essentially bypass the national bank, first bank in the United States. And if I do that, a bank with no money is irrelevant, right? A bank with no money is like a computer with no power. It doesn't matter. And so Jackson uses an executive order to basically bypass the bank, and it just destroys it. And it works, but it's also kind of vaguely unconstitutional, right? I mean, should the president be able to disregard an act of Congress? But in the end, Jackson does it, kills the bank. Fun story. When Jackson leaves office in 1836, his successor, Martin Van Buren, a recession immediately happens, and a national bank would have saved us, but it's gone. And so they call Martin Van Buren Martin Van Ruin, right? Because the economy blows up. Sorry, it wasn't really his fault, but I mean, he was the president. So Martin Van Buren, whatever. And so the little wizard from Albany, New York, one of the first presidents from New York State, excuse me, Little Wizard. They called him Little Magician, the Wizard of Albany, who had organized New York State politics from behind the scenes and had become Jackson's second vice president after Calhoun had resigned, because Calhoun quit. And Calhoun became a senator from South Carolina for the rest of his life. And in the 1850s, famously delivered his final speech by being carried in on a door from the hotel room where he was staying, where he was wrapped in a blanket, glaring at everybody. And one of the other senators read Calhoun's last speech, attacking Henry Clay's attempt to broker a compromise between North and South over the issues that erupted after the Mexican War. It's Compromise of 1850. So anyway, just whatever. And so Jackson, leaves office, and he changed American politics because, for example, the veto. The previous presidents had vetoed legislation a total of 6 times. 6 total. Jackson used the veto. Yeah. An average of, I guess, 1 per president. Right? Jackson used the veto more than that in his first term. And the previous presidents had said, I will veto something I think is unconstitutional. That's it. That's the veto philosophy. Jackson said, I'll veto anything that anybody passes that's not my party. Right? So like if the other party passes something, veto. Why? Because why would I give them credit, right? And so he turned the veto into a political weapon, which it has mostly remained to this day. The convention that nominated Jackson, we have conventions every 4 years, both parties, up until the present day. They don't mean a lot because, again, we're primaries, right? But we still do them. It's still a thing. The balloons come from the ceiling, and Al Gore gives Tipper Gore the tongue on the stage, and everybody gets really uncomfortable. You didn't see that in 2000? He hugs Tipper, and he gives her a kiss, and normally it's like on the cheek, and he slipped her the tongue, and it got real. It got real. It got real in 2000. Look it up. Right? To be totally fair, Al Gore's only actual talent was to marry Tipper Gore and produce hot daughters, which is right. I mean, they were, yeah, they were very smart also, but like that was, you wouldn't necessarily know that Al Gore would have that power, but it was like, wow, your kids are significantly more attractive than you. And then it was Teresa, I think, was the one that was the writer in Futurama. It was Kristen. It was Kristen Gore. She wrote Futurama, which was a super great, smart show. She was super smart. But if you look at them, you're like, what are these super attractive women doing with these 2 schlubs? Is what I'm saying. And so I'm not a fan of Tipper Gore. And that one time she tried to censor music in the 90s. So what's that? Yeah, dating 2 schlubs, weird.
Chris Miller says the only Andrew we care about today is Emmy Award-winning Andrew Cuomo.
He won an Emmy for his COVID-19 conferences, which is so weird. Also, we have to talk about the fact that over the summer, they took a picture of Governor Cuomo wearing a white polo shirt, and it absolutely looks like he has a nipple piercing. So that's just a thing that it's true. He did look like he had a nipple ring. I'm not saying it's just wild that the governor of New York has a nipple piercing. Hashtag 2020.
We all just people here.
It's fine. He can have one if he wants. Why doesn't he just? I need to know more information about that.
Or less.
Maybe she's into it. I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, Emmy Award-winning Governor Andrew Cuomo. Chris. Yeah, I mean, I'm here for Mario. No, I'm here for Mario, who ran for president. That's what I'm saying. If Chris Cuomo if Chris Cuomo got it, would be like, well, he did a lot of news reports, but apparently they awarded it to him for it was like a special Emmy or something, but for having the daily coronavirus. I don't know. To be fair, what other governor of what state do we care about? I mean, DeSantis.
We do not care about
no, I don't care very much about.
Other than to burn him in effigy.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of DeSantis. What do they call him? Death Santis? And I don't even know. A while ago, I cared about the governor of New Jersey because he was used to get in fights with his constituents on the radio and call them names. But the current governor of New Jersey doesn't do that, so I'm not super interested in whoever it is. And so if Chris Miller's here, he understands why we care about.
He asked about the Snyder Cut. The Snyder Cut
I mean, look, if Snyder ever releases that stuff, I guess we'll watch it. But it's just I'm exhausted by the idea that he made a 19-hour cut of Justice League, I guess. That and to be fair, I guess if Snyder films it in its entirety and it's better, it can't be worse than actual Justice League, which was the most boring movie I've ever seen. It was like Avengers without all the good parts. So it's just it's exhausting the whole. And I'm not gonna lie to you. 300 was I like to watch it. It was not historically accurate. It was the least historically accurate movie that has not been made by Michael Bay, right? But on the or Mel Gibson or Mel Gibson or Mel Gibson. But like it was a Greek propaganda movie. If the Spartans made a propaganda movie about Thermopylae, it would be that movie. And it was fun.
Look, this is Sparta.
This is Sparta. Yeah, tonight we dine in hell. But at the same time, like Zack Snyder just needs to stop. Like he and I get it. He left Justice League, but I think one of his children committed suicide. So it was like I get he can't finish the movie. And you can't just pause it because all these other people are committed and there's whatever. So he just left it and they made Joss Whedon do it. And understandably, there's not two people in the earth with different directorial visions than Joss Whedon and Zack Snyder. So like I don't know why they hired that guy. Hire literally anybody else. And the resulting movie was like a 50% Joss Whedon, 50% Zack Snyder, 100% bad movie. So I don't know. I'm not. Was.
He also said it's a similar question whether or not certain.
Oh, I mean, look, the Greeks said a lot of stuff. Okay, Herodotus said 500,000 people were in the, or he said like 5 million people were in the Persian army or something. Of course they weren't. That's not just ridiculous, right? But anyway, who was it? It was the dude that was the guy that was Xerxes. Was it like Diego Luna or somebody? It was some famous actor that was, of course, under 40 pounds of makeup and CG that you wouldn't recognize who it was. Well, yeah, all the what's that? I want to say now. I got to look it up because it's bothering me.
Teresa comments that it's no Ken Burns.
Oh yeah.
Chris is just straight up laughing.
It's Rodrigo Santoro. Oh, it's the dude from Westworld. It's the bandit from Westworld. You know the gunslinger bandit who's in love with the tattooed lady, and yeah. Well, they're not. No, they're partner.
He ends up with Maeve.
Yeah, he loves it. He's in love with Maeve. Yeah.
Who's in love with Isabel? Nobody. But that's his character.
It's his backstory. Yeah. But that's him. They shaved his head and put a pound of makeup on him to make him a Persian dude. Yeah. It's the delivery of the lines. It's the yeah. But anyway, yeah. No, I don't. I mean, Zack Snyder. I mean, like.
Okay. All right. Let's get back to Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, but
a new vice president.
But like, you can't overestimate Jackson's effect on the political system because the convention and all that, and to top it all, a group of people in Jackson's first term decided he was going to wreck the country. He didn't like the Constitution. He was, broke the law. He did whatever he wanted, and so they formed a political party, the American Whig Party. And the Whigs were named after the people who fought the Stuart monarchs in 17th century England, right? The Whigs. That's what. And the Whigs in English, WHIG, was a term of abuse for rural, ignorant people like hicks or rednecks or something. And the Whigs in the 1600s said, "Hey, if you're going to insult us with this, we'll turn it into a badge of honor because there are people that care about the liberty of free English people, right?" And so but like good though. And so, because the Whigs were right, the Stuarts were bad. Like the Whigs were correct. Ooh. Yeah. Say we're selling. No, we're only selling feet pics on the Discord or on the Patreon. The Patreon. Yeah. No, we're selling feet pics on the Patreon. Chris Lee gets all the feet pics. Cut. And so. Tim is like.
You wouldn't even rub them when I was pregnant. Shut up. Don't take a picture of her feet, dude. It's not okay. Consent is important. No means no.
I'm sorry, it's blurry. Because I was laughing too hard. But the opposition to Jackson forms the Whig Party, which ends up becoming the second a major American political party during the age of Jackson. It's the second party system. It's the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, and then the Democrats and the Whigs. And the Whigs, Abraham Lincoln is a Whig until the Republicans are formed. The Whig Party splits apart, and the leftover Whigs form the Republicans. And so Jackson literally reorganizes the entire political system. He literally creates the entire second political party system, essentially in opposition to him. The two parties are the party that supports Jackson and the party that opposes him. My favorite moment is Harvard University, John Quincy Adams' alma mater, announces they're going to give Jackson an honorary degree. He's never been to college. And Adams writes back a letter that says, I cannot believe that you would think that I would disgrace myself by going and sitting on a stage to see my alma mater abase itself in front of an illiterate barbarian by awarding him a doctorate of letters. And so the short answer is no. Right? But Adams is like, this guy's an idiot. He doesn't know the Constitution. He can't read or write. He's a savage. And you're going to give him a degree. But of course, they're trying to make nice. They're trying to curry favor. Right? And so Adams, by the way, joins the Congress. He gets elected to Congress in the 1830s from Massachusetts. JQ, his dad, of course, died 1824, July 4th. He and Thomas Jefferson died on the same day. No, Parson Weems convinced them to be friends. Parson Weems visited both of them and asked them both to reconcile, and they were writing letters. And Adams's last words, he said, I hope Thomas Jefferson is okay, because I heard that he was sick in his last letter. And then Adams died, and then Jefferson died, same day. So it's July 4th, 1824.
Adams built his house, so that Jefferson always had to bow in order to walk in.
Not as far as Jefferson never went to Adams's house, as far as I know. Yeah, it's a different.
There's some place where they built the house with the short, like person supporting the wall.
Yeah.
They built it with a short door frame.
I know what you're talking. Yeah, I can't remember that off the top of my head. But anyway, John Quincy Adams gets elected to Congress, and he rediscovers a second career as an opponent of slavery. And I almost talked about this tonight, but it's really complicated, and I don't know that anyone would care. But Adams actually first he defended the Amistad rebels, the slaves that seized the Amistad, the rogue slave trading ship, the Spanish ship, and they tried to steer it away to Africa, and they ended up in Virginia, I think. Adams defended them in the Supreme Court and delivered like a 12-hour speech from memory, extemporaneously, about freedom and like the legal rights of Englishmen and like the Somerset decision and emancipation and natural law, and until the Supreme Court was like, look, these people are free, you're right. And Adams ended up becoming an icon in the anti-slavery movement because there was a huge fight in Congress over the legality of accepting petitions addressing the issue of slavery. And Adams used that as a free speech issue, and ended up turning it into a fight about the legality of speech about slavery. It was a wonderful, wonderful story that I guess maybe we'll end up having to do a video about because it's really good. And the more I talk about it, the more I want to talk about it. But Adams ended up sort of having a career in Congress for over a decade as an opponent of slavery. He died on the floor of the Congress in the 1840s. And actually, in his last term in Congress, Adams was representing Massachusetts. In the back, when he collapsed and suffered a heart attack on the floor, was Abraham Lincoln in his first term in Congress, his only term in Congress as a Whig. And so it was sort of fitting that Lincoln, the guy who eventually would lead the legislative emancipation of the slaves, was watching one of the great opponents of slavery deliver his last speech on the floor of Congress, which is sort of a big deal. Right? And so Jackson justly deserves credit for reorganizing the Democratic Party, but he reorganized it in a way around this populist rhetoric around the defense of slavery and, of course, white supremacy, right? Around the supremacy of white people over both enslaved Black people and also Native Americans. And so, his legacy is on the one hand profound, but also not necessarily positive.
Keeping it safe from invaders.
Oh yeah. Tim says Jackson did all this to protect the Americans and advance the cause of America. Yeah, totally he did. Absolutely, if he was here, he would say, look, I did what I thought was right for the people that, the Indians go away and we get that land and we can make something out of it. We can build towns and cities and resources. Yeah, absolutely. And sure. And the Indians and the Cherokee, they're civilized, right? They have reading and writing. They've converted to Christianity, but yet their skin color is wrong and they should be driven out, right? And so Jackson is very selective in his interpretation of that. But yeah, he always thought what he did was in the interest of serving the Union, right? He was absolutely pro-Union. He hated Calhoun for creating the intellectual groundwork. Yeah, and he did what he thought was the right things for what we would say is the wrong reasons, right? for the right things for the white people. Yeah, of course. Right. His definition of American was white people, and he protected and advanced their interests at great length. There's no doubt. Right. And he hated Calhoun for advancing what he saw as the intellectual interests of slave owners. Right. Calhoun is the guy responsible for the Civil War in the sense that he created the idea of secession, the idea that this union was simply temporary. Who, Jackson?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he hated secession. He hated the idea. The union is indissoluble. You can't break it. Right. And in that instance, he was as much a Whig as any of his opponents. Yeah. And he hated the fact that the Democrats had sort of internalized in their DNA this sort of secessionist impulse. But there was nothing you could do about it. They drew their support from the South, and there was no traducing that. And so I guess we've gone on for a while. I guess it's time. Yeah. So please, yeah, we're all here. Corey's still awake. Yeah. And so Evan went to bed.
Dude, I think you ran like 26 miles today.
Oh well, okay. So we probably won't be around. I think next week. Okay. Yeah.
Before you start speaking for us, I'm going to put up a survey to see about next week because I will not be around next Saturday, so it will definitely not be on Saturday. But there's a possibility that it could be on Friday. If that doesn't happen, the problem is the week after that. I think we are also busy on Saturday. Well, he won't be with me. He's not helping to crew you.
That's true.
Matt cannot run a mile. But the short point being that we've got some races coming up, so I'm going to put up a survey to see if people would be interested in watching something on a Friday night, because I believe Friday nights are available. If Matt is,
I mean, next Friday, that would be no problem.
Yeah.
I mean, you would be here, I would be here. We could certainly do it.
And the next Friday.
And I believe the Friday after that also.
That's also true. Yeah.
So
also true.
it's like, and then the weekend after that is Hanukkah, and we'll be going to my parents' house. I haven't told you about that yet. Surprise!
I'm learning about that now, yeah.
I just haven't had a chance. And the holiday seasons being what they are, we probably. So I'm going to put up a thing and to see if people would be interested in watching something on a Friday night. I don't know what the topic would be. Please throw out your suggestions. I feel like maybe something about, Native American history, because, most people don't know about anything, and we know the false story of the first Thanksgiving.
Yeah. I mean, Native American history is certainly not one of my areas of
Yeah.
Hang on.
That's true, but
I mean, that's true.
So maybe something about that.
But yeah, so maybe something about that, maybe some other topic, depending on what people suggest to us. As always, you can please like this and share it with your friends so that we get some people watching. And I know we've been off for a little while here, but that's huge for us to at least make enough money to buy our booze here. That's really all we're working for at this point, is trying to make enough money to pay for the booze we drink during the show. What are you doing on your watch?
Thing where it erased some of my favorite contacts on my phone. It's cool. I'm just whatever. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Thanks always to our Patreon subscribers, and thanks always to everybody who comes in and is here with us. And if you're interested in stuff, drop a comment in there. At some point, Chris Miller suggested good and bad historical movies. We're probably going to do that one sometime, because I've got some thoughts about that. I would have to decide what I think are the good ones, though. Patriot's awful. It's so bad. Also, it's bad. Like, it's just all bad. It's just a bad movie. Well, I mean, that's the thing, is like 300 is an enjoyable movie, but it's completely historically inaccurate. And the worst thing about 300, and 300 is okay in the sense that, of course, it's a fantasy movie. Of course, it's not. Well, The Patriot presents itself as like vaguely accurate, and it's not. And like, so that's like that. But anyway, yeah. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. I'll say good night to everyone also.
Any last questions from anybody? It doesn't look like I see any there, but I will give you about 5 seconds before. Yeah, you drank probably too much of that.
It's fine.
What
Right
happened to your
here. It's
hat?
just I got
halfway through?
sweaty being under the lights.
Here,
Under
it's
the
just, I
lights
got
maker.
sweaty being under the lights. Under the lights maker. You
I
slap
did do those things. It's fine. That's what he's a dog butt. You smack him on the butt.
Dog butt. It's very precious.
Yeah, that's fine. And he liked it.
He loves it.
So,
All right. Say good night with
all
everybody.
right. Good night, everybody. Have a good Thanksgiving. We'll probably see everybody next week. Hopefully on Friday. Thanks for being here.